know there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. We release this treatment to that power, knowing so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is. All right. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I hope everyone had a safe and Happy New Year. And as I said in the treatment, it's kind of arbitrary that our culture picks January the 1st as the time to begin a new year, because other cultures have other dates and other ways of measuring time, moon time. You could start with the moon cycles and things like that. But the idea is that we're doing it again. We are doing it again. You know, we're riding this rock around the sun one more time. We are doing it again, but it doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be just a repeat or a do-over of all of the other times before, because each moment, each instant, we have the opportunity to experience something new, to see the old, to see the familiar in new and exciting ways. I love the image of children in their curiosity, discovering the things that are so familiar to us as adults, you know, that we just take them with a grain of salt, and that's the way it is. And the children are in such awe of the ordinary things because it's all new to them. You see, they're discovering anew. And I remember one time that I was traveling, and I was coming back from the West Coast I was coming back to Raleigh, and I wound up in Charlotte, North Carolina at the airport to make my connection to Raleigh. And it was, you know, if you ever come back on the red eye, you get in an ungodly hour, like 5:30 in the morning. And the airport was mostly closed. There were just a few shops that were starting to open up. There was one vendor that had a little push cart with coffee and sticky buns on it, or bagels and rolls and things like that. And that was it. You know, the restaurants hadn't opened yet. None of the shops had opened yet. Everything had the gates down. And the flight from Charlotte to Raleigh was a very small commuter plane. I mean, it was just a little twin-engine plane that might have held like 10 or 12 passengers. It was so small you had to get on a scale before you went out to the plane, so they knew how much weight they were carrying and where you were sitting on the plane to make sure it was balanced. But there was a family there. There was two older adults that I would make to be grandparents. There was a middle-aged woman there. And the story in my head was that was the daughter, you know, and then there was a sweet little girl, 4 or 5 years old, who was the child, the daughter and the granddaughter, at least in the story I made up in my head. And I was just kind of sitting there with my eyes closed, hadn't slept much all night long, was just kind of sitting there with my eyes closed. And all of a sudden I heard this little one, because there was nothing else making noise at the gate. And I heard this little one, and she shouted out, and she said, "Look, look, look, I have free air, I have free air." And I opened my eyes to see what she was talking about, and she had taken a little piece of paper and folded it into a fan. You know how we used to kind of fold them in the accordion fold and then make a fan, like you could just flick your wrist back and forth and fan your face. And she was going around to her parents and grandparents, and she was just kind of demonstrating her discovery. She had free air, you know. And I thought, how precious is that? You know, we go through life and we're surrounded by the air. We breathe in the air. We breathe out the air. We never stop to think about just what a miracle it is. And this is one of the reasons why in meditation we start with our breath to help us to become aware of that which is going on and we're not aware of. But it's the curiosity. It's the curiosity of the child that I'm getting at, see. Are we willing to explore? Are we willing to explore our own nature? Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And that's where we begin again every year in our teaching. Now I want to give a little bit of context of the teaching and where we're going, but just for everybody who's been with us all these years, I think this is about the 30th time that I'm going through these these 4 chapters that are the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook by Ernest Holmes. Now, these chapters, the thing itself, the way it works, what it does, and how to use it, these are the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook. So I need to give you just kind of a little bit of context here of how we get there and what it is that we're talking about. What is science of mind? Why do we have a textbook, and who was Ernest Holmes and all these kind of things? Because if we are going to study this teaching as a tool, or as the raft, as we would say in Buddhism, as the raft that helps us to move forward, to grow in our journey, then probably we need to know just a little bit of the history of where it comes from. So Ernest Holmes was born in Bethel, Maine, in kind of the backwoods of Maine in the late 1880s, I believe. And it was the home was kind of a basic home. And his brother Fenwick, his older brother, Fenwick went on to become a Congregationalist preacher. Now, Congregationalists were kind of what the Puritans became, or an offshoot of the Puritans when the Puritans came to this country. And Fenwick was a Congregationalist preacher. And in the house, Fenwick wrote a loving biography, and he said in the house they had 3 books. They had the Bible, they had an illustrated children's version of the Bible, or a storybook about the Bible, and then they had another book by Henry Drummond called Natural Law in a Spiritual Universe. Now, in those days, before TV and before radio, there were lecture circuits, and lecturers would come into town. It's like every Saturday night, people would go to a town hall, they would pay money, and then they would hear this different set of lectures. And Ernest's mother would go to those lectures, and she would listen to these. And a lot of the lectures were what we would call metaphysical lectures. They were speakers who would talk on the same kind of things that we talk about every Sunday. And this one book that she had, Natural Law in the Spiritual Universe by Drummond, you could say, if you go back and look at it, you would read that and say, oh, I see, this is very much like what the Science of Mind textbook teaches. So anyway, Ernest Holmes kind of grew up in that family, but the one thing that seemed to be acceptable in the family is that they were allowed to ask why, curiosity. Ernest's mother called him the big question mark, because he always had a lot of questions. And I want you to kind of keep that. Let me get some water here. I'd like you to kind of keep that in mind with this childlike curiosity that we're speaking of. There's a fable that comes to us from the East that says when the gods created human beings, they wanted to hide the most important secret from them. And the gods had a meeting and kind of discussed, well, where are we going to hide this so that human beings won't find it? And one of them said, well, let's put it way at the deepest part of the ocean. Let's put this secret down at the deepest part of the ocean. And the other god said, no, human beings are pretty curious. Eventually they're going to want to explore the deepest part of the ocean. They'll find it there. And another one of the gods said, well, let's put it up at the top of the highest mountain, And they said, no, human beings are kind of a curious lot. They'll want to climb that mountain just because it's there, and eventually they will find the secret. And they said, well, where is the one place where they're not likely to look? And they decided to hide it inside mankind itself. That this was the last place that human beings would look. This is what we are talking about here. We are talking about being curious and going within, exploring within. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? So Ernest Holmes, when he was about 19, he apparently read a lot. I mean, those were the 3 books that were in the house, but he apparently read a lot and and developed these ideas. He read some of the ideas from Sri Aurobindo in The Life Divine, Hindu Mysticism. Very, very profound book, very hard to read, but very profound book. And he went to Boston to, one of his siblings lived in Boston, and he went to Boston to take a job. And he said when he got to Boston, he discovered Emerson, and it was like drinking cool water on a hot summer's day. He was able to start to explore. So this insatiable curiosity, this desire to know, this desire to drink in more and more and more information was a very very obvious part of his life. And what he did, he went to California. His brother Fenwick was preaching at a church in California. Excuse me, I'm getting more water. I think it was Venice Beach. And Ernest went there and got a job in the purchasing department at the Parks and Recreation department for the city out there. And the two of them got together and they started teaching these classes on Emerson. They were started off as Emersonian lecturers. And this is what they did. They would hold these, little informal sessions just like we have, and they would talk about the Emerson's essays. And somebody said to Ernest, well, why don't you go out and try to expand your reach and advertise this to the general public? And he didn't quite want to do that, but they talked him into it. So he rented a meeting room at the public library and held the first meeting, and people were interested. It took off. So Ernest and Fenwick went around and taught these classes as Emersonian lecturers. Now, Fenwick went on, just to kind of complete the history a little bit, Fenwick went on and became a divine science minister, and I'll explain the relationship of that. Ernest was also ordained as a divine science minister. And Fenwick went and he took up pastor of a church in New York City, which Emmett Fox later took up. Ernest went on to take the ideas that he had learned, which were not original to him. His presentation may have been original, but he said, that what he calls the science of mind, which the science of mind is the textbook and the teaching. That's what it is. And he said it is not a special revelation unto one man, but it is accumulation of ideas of the ages. If you kind of take and look at the ideas of the ages, if you study religion as a scientist would study any other topic, you would start to see this correlation. Excuse me, having a tough time with my cough today. But he said this is just a correlation of different ideas, and the main point I would like to make there is that he said we should be able to look at these ideas concerning religion without fear, without superstition. So many of us grew up in traditions where we were taught, don't look at any other tradition. Don't look at any other tradition. You will be misled. You will be deceived. You will lose your soul for all eternity. We've gone through periods where we see book burnings and things like that. And Ernest said we shouldn't be afraid. If we are sincerely seeking to know the Creator, that which created us, assuming that there is a Creator, and that might be our first question, is there or isn't there? And it's a fair question. It's a valid question. We should be able to figure that out, what our opinion of that is. But he said, don't be afraid. Don't be superstitious. Be curious. Be able to ask questions. Be able to think about what you're thinking about. Now this is most important, critical thinking, objective thinking. How do you know what you know? How do you know what you know? If we are going to spend another year here together on Sundays and Wednesdays and Monday night prayer groups and all the things that we do, if we're going to spend another year together understanding, growing, expanding our knowledge and our experience of this thing called the divine, how do you know what you know? How do you know what you know? And if we look at the world around us today, if you look at what's going on today with all of the conflicting opinions and arguments and things on social media and all this, I think if we just step back as a casual observer and look at it without becoming engaged and taking sides, I think we can see that people have very, very strong opinions, but those opinions are not necessarily based on fact. They believe what they want to believe. They listen to the information that agrees with what they already believe. And anybody who doesn't believe the same way is simply wrong and needs to be quieted. You see this, people come out and they say, well, it's this way. And somebody else says, well, no, I don't think so. I think it's the other way. And then they go and vandalize their house or, say mean things about them on social media, bully them, all those kind of things. And I think what we have to take away from that, if we're just looking at the level of maturity of human consciousness as it exists in our society today, is it's not very mature. It's not very mature. We should be able to say, well, I've got an opinion and you've got an opinion, and let's talk about the differences of the opinion, but I don't have to convince you, you don't have to convince me. I'm really curious to know. I'm really curious to understand how you think, why you think, and all those things. We're not there. We're not there. We are at the point where people say, this is my way, this is the right way, this is the only right way, and everybody who doesn't agree with me is just simply wrong. And there's no need to have a conversation with people who are wrong because they don't know anything, see? That same attitude has existed for thousands of years when it comes to religious study. People come up with an idea, an opinion. Now, an opinion is a belief that we might hold. It's not necessarily provable or based in fact, if you want to put it that way. And if you think about religious ideas, they're all opinions, because no one can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt what their concept is, right? And so they'll say, well, it's a matter of faith. We believe it because it's a matter of faith. And that's okay. But what people have done is they have taken this concept of my way is the right way and the only right way, and anybody who doesn't agree with me is wrong, and that exists in what I would call your base religions, your fundamental religions that are based on dogma and creed. Now, this is a necessary step in the evolution of consciousness, but I think we have to understand that there are layers of the evolution of consciousness that go beyond that. And I'm laying this out as context because if we are going to study the Science of Mind textbook, we need to have the context of where it fits into all of this and what we're doing. So for many years in religions, the adherents have been taught, don't look outside our teaching, don't look at what other people are saying or doing or teaching, because they're wrong, you see, and you can't learn from people who are wrong. You just, you just pray for them that they will see the light and they will come to believe the way that we believe, right? So for that reason that many people have been born into that type of culture, this idea of asking or questioning, well, what do I believe about God? And why do I believe it about God? How do I know if what I believe is right or wrong? And what are the other ways that we might believe about God? See? If we start to ask those questions and we are in that environment that says don't question, it creates a problem. And many of us had that problem when we started to ask these questions. Many people would come to our church and say, well, when I was a kid, I got in trouble in Sunday school because I kept asking questions that the teacher couldn't answer. And then the teacher would just tell me, well, you have to be quiet and believe it because that's what it says in the book. Excuse me. And of course, that doesn't satisfy the curious mind. So maybe one of the first things that we have to start with is we have been given this intellectual curiosity. We have been given this desire to explore. Perhaps it just developed as a means of survival, you might say, to check out our environment. But if we start with the premise that there is some type of creator or creative force or creative power in the universe that created us, then this curiosity that is within us is the gift that will lead us to find it, to find that greatest secret that's not at the bottom of the ocean, that's not at the top of the mountain, but is within us. So the first point I would like to make is that what Dr. Holmes was encouraging us when he wrote the Science of Mind textbook and he started to develop curriculum and classes around it was everybody should question, and even question what the book says, even question what he says, question everybody, question everything, because the only way you're going to know is when you satisfy your own curiosity. And even with that, you are going to have to admit that, well, there may be another way. But this is where I am now. This is where I am on the growth. There was a series of lectures in the 90s. The Dalai Lama did a series of lectures in London on the Four Noble Truths. And I used to have recordings of it. I don't know where they are now. But he had the lecture, and of course it was a concert hall, I think, and it was packed. And up in the front were all Buddhist monks and nuns in their saffron robes. And after the lecture, he took questions. And of course, it was the students, the nuns and the monks, who had questions because they were really into the teaching of what the Dalai Lama was saying. Most of us don't understand if the Dalai Lama refers to a Buddhist script. We don't know. We're just not familiar with that. But the Buddhist monks and nuns were. And I'll never forget this one came question. We had a translator. But in the answer to the question, the Dalai Lama said, well, the answer to your question, and he quoted this scripture. And he said, and also, and then he quoted a famous Buddhist teacher said this, and also, and he quoted another famous Buddhist teacher said that. And I say this, and he gave them a research project, right? Here's all the places where you can go explore what other people have said and what the scriptures themselves say about your question. And then the Dalai Lama said, but you should not accept you should not accept the scripture's answer just because the scripture said it. You should not accept the other teacher's answers just because the other teachers said it. But you must decide for yourself. You must explore. You must find out for yourself if any of those answers is your answer. And I love that. I loved when he said that, see? We have to be free to explore. So this is the spirit in which Ernest Holmes put out the teaching. Right? He said, here it is. Here's this teaching. Here's this teaching that we can work with. Now, he called it the science of mind, and he wasn't the first one to call it that. Emma Curtis Hopkins referred to the science of mind. I believe Mary Baker Eddy may have. Certainly in Buddhism, they talk about mind science or Buddhism as a science of mind. Now, what is mind is going to be a key question we have to consider. But Ernest was not the first one to explore this. And he put it out, and he put it into his textbook, and he put it into curriculum, and he put it into classes, and he said, here, take this, work with this, but use it, apply this teaching. Because it is in the application of the teaching, it is in the performance of the spiritual practice where we really grow, right? We can read about something, we can study about something, we can listen to other people's experiences about something, but until we go and apply ourselves to that experience ourselves, we really don't know. We just really don't know. We may know all about it, but we don't know it. When I was learning how to fly, I read all kinds of textbooks on aircrafts and how the controls worked and theories about what you're supposed to do in order to make an aircraft take off and turn. And intellectually, I had a world of information, But the first time I got in that cockpit and the flight instructor gave me the controls and said, "Let's go," it was a whole different ballgame, see? A whole different experience. Now, everything that the book said, eventually I learned to be true, but I didn't have the ability just from reading about them, from having head knowledge, to actually experience it. There was something in the practice that made the intellectual reading become true knowledge. And this is the same with our spiritual practice as well. We can read about the lives of the saints. We can read about the lives of the mystics. We can read about different religions and teachings, but until we are willing to apply what they are teaching us to do, we really don't have it. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves, and as we begin this year together, as we begin this this journey one more time, is, am I willing to explore? Am I to move beyond any pre-existing beliefs or superstitions or biases or prejudices? Am I willing to move beyond all of that? And where there is a practice involved, getting more water, where there's a practice involved, which is the primary practice as taught in Science of Mind is affirmative prayer or treatment. Am I willing to actually use that? Am I willing to actually apply that to my life? Now, giving a little bit more context here, because I really want to go into this beginning of this year with kind of understanding context, understanding where we're coming from, understanding where we fit into it. If we take the level of consciousness that says, my way is the right way, my way is the only right way, and everybody else who doesn't agree with me is wrong, I would label that to be fundamentalist or dogmatic. Now, it doesn't matter what particular ideology this applies to. You will find this in all human endeavors. I think you will find that mindset that says, my way is the right way, it is the only right way, and everybody who doesn't agree with me is wrong. You see it in politics. You will see it to some degree in sports, but you see it particularly in religions. So at that level of consciousness, it is all about doing. It is all about behavior, right? So at that level of consciousness, if we look at the Ten Commandments are rules of behavior. Nothing wrong with telling people not to steal. That's a good thing. But people knew that they shouldn't steal long before Moses came down from the mountain with the tablets, you see. So it's all about behavior, and it's all about pleasing an authority that is outside of ourselves. It is. I call it the Santa Claus definition of God. There's this God in heaven sits on a throne, has a long white beard, has this book, looks down upon us, observes everything that we do, writes it down in the book, who's naughty, who's nice, and then there's going to be a time of judgment when we have to account and answer for all of those things. The key thing there is that all of the power is outside. In those forms of teachings, the power is generally outside of us. And we please that power by our behavior. If we do the things that we're supposed to do, we please it. If we don't do the things we're supposed to do, it gets angry with us, right? And that's okay. That's one phase of the maturity of consciousness. That's one place where we are. And we all pass through that. I mean, we all have the experience as children growing up that all of the power is outside of us, all the authority is outside of us. If we want to get anything, we have to find a way to get those who have it to give it to us. You know, even as an infant, if we want to eat, we have to find a way to get our mother to come and feed us. That is a world experience. That is a life experience. And that experience kind of carries over into the ideas, the concepts that people form about religions. But there's another level. There's a level that goes beyond that, which is a level based on knowing. And it is not just about doing, but it is about understanding why do we do what we do. Why is it important or good to do the things that we do? Excuse me again, more water. So Emmett Fox, for example, asks us to consider in the Ten Commandments where it says, thou shalt not, to consider it to be a statement of fact, thou cannot. You cannot. So at a human level of just us getting along as neighbors, you know, not stealing from one another is probably good advice. But if we truly understand that you and I are one, then how can I steal from myself? If we truly understand that life is done unto us according to our belief, how can anyone take something from me that is mine by right of consciousness? This is kind of coming into a deeper analysis of what's going on here. Fox went so far as to say, excuse me, if you had a $20 bill and it was yours by right of consciousness, you could lay it down on the sidewalk in the middle of Times Square, New York City, and come back 24 hours later and it would still be there because it was yours. It was yours by right of consciousness. Now most of us are saying, are you crazy? A $20 bill on the streets of New York? Well, that would be gone before you took 2 steps. But he was serious about it. He was serious about it. Is life done unto you according to your belief or not? Or not? And how would you know? So this second level of maturity is what I call the Gnostic level, or it's a knowing. And it starts out by knowing from teachers. It starts out from knowing from reading books. It starts out from listening to different speakers and lecturers and talking to different people. But it is a curiosity of it, no longer being satisfied with just being told to do or not to do, but trying to understand why, you know. Thou shalt not kill. Why? Why is that important? You know, does that apply just to humans? Does that apply to animals? What might be the reason behind that? And was it kill or was it murder? Because our society sanctions killing, but we don't sanction murder. So these are just examples of deeper questions that we start to go into and say, what is the reasoning behind this? Why is this important? What are all of these teachings trying to tell us, you see? When Jesus said, you and I are one and I and the Father are one, what does that mean? How do I experience that in my life? So what I'm getting to is at this second level, which I call the Gnostic level, or gnosis, from knowing. Now, if you go to read anything about the Gnostics on the internet, you're going to find a different definition than what I am talking about. And the reason for that is that first level of consciousness, that rose to power. And when people start asking questions of power, it's a threat to power. You saw what happened to Socrates when he taught the youth of Athens to ask why. So what has happened is Gnosticism, knowing, has been defined in terms of the winners and has been turned into something bad. And I'm not talking about all of these different things that you will read that people say what Gnosticism is. What I'm saying is that we reach a level where we want to know. Doing is not just good enough. It's not that we stop doing. It's not that we reach this level and say, well, it's okay to steal. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is we reach a level where it's important for us to understand the meaning behind the teachings. the meaning behind why it's important. Right? And this starts us into a deeper level of growth. So I would say, along these lines of the maturity of consciousness, that the science of mind as a teaching fits squarely into this second level. Excuse me. This level of exploring intellectually and exploring intuitively and coming to know, coming to our own understanding of knowing. That this is where that teaching falls. Then there's a third level, and that's the mystical level, and that is the direct experience of the beloved. Now, Dr. Holmes talks about this. Dr. Holmes points to this. Dr. Holmes has had the experience himself, but he did not want to focus on that at the level of the teaching. This was something that we would unfold. This is something that we will get to if we study the teaching and apply the practice, spiritual mind treatment. Because with all our getting, he says, we have to get God first. Right? If we look at a condition in our lives that we wish to change, we come to realize that the condition exists because an idea of separation between what the condition is and what God is, or what life without the condition is. And the only way that we can remove that condition is to close that gap. To bring our consciousness, to bring ourselves closer to God. But ultimately there is the third level, as far as we know, for this life here on this plane. This is where we actually start to experience the oneness. We experience what Jesus talked about when he said, I and the Father are one, and you and I are one. It's what the Hindu mystics talk about, the oneness. Right? The I amness, the suchness, the enlightenment, the awakening. You can call this all these other things. And even in some of the fundamental dogmatic religions, people will talk about having a visitation. They experience something. There's an experience. They experience something that they recognize as this oneness, as this allness, as this unity. Now, when you get into the mystical teachings, and I kind of move across during the year as we go together. I kind of move across these three. But as you get into the mystical teachings, Joel Goldsmith in The Infinite Way is probably more clearly focused on the third level than the second. Now, he spent 28 years, he says, at the second level. But then he kind of had the epiphany that, well, if God is all there is, then what we really want, our real goal, if you want to call it a goal, is what we really want is that experience of God. So let's go directly for that. Let's just focus on having that experience. And at that level, meditation in the form of be still and know meditation, that is the key practice. There's also a key practice that we'll find, like our Wednesday night group now, we're kind of listing some tapes from Hindu teachings. And we start to find that meditation is the key practice, is the most important practice there. And I do apologize for my cough. So Dr. Holmes wrote this book called The Science of Mind. And he said, we should explore other religions. We should explore other teachings. We should draw freely and take the good from wherever we find it. And we should leave the not so good behind. Just let it go. But we should be willing to explore the very nature of life, the thing itself, the very nature of life. Now, religious science was the organization that was created to deliver the teaching, to kind of develop curriculum, to keep the textbooks the way that they are, those kind of things. And religious science over the years took different forms. The organization took different forms. It is now the Centers for Spiritual Living. And people didn't understand religious science. They didn't understand, what is that? Isn't that an oxymoron? But I'll tell you where that comes from. And we're probably going to have to close today because we're getting close to the end of time. And we're going to close today, and I never really even got into the thing itself. I was just trying to give you the setup of why he's asking these questions. Alrighty. Brief history. In the United States of America, there was a clockmaker from Maine called Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, P.P. Quimby, and he is considered to be ground zero for the New Thought movement in the United States. New Thought being, if you wish to have a new experience, you have to have a new thought. That's it. Not New Age, not anything else. The people try to make it into New Thought. Quimby suffered from tuberculosis, and he believed that he was able to heal himself from that through the powers of mind, through the exhilaration of life, through riding horses or a buggy at a great rate of speed and just being enthusiastic and excited about life. Quimby is kind of ground zero. One of Quimby's students, or there's kind of discussion about who taught who, but Mary Baker Eddy from Christian Science was with Quimby for a while, and the Quimby folks will say that he helped her to experience a healing as well. One of Mary Baker Eddy's students was Emma Curtis Hopkins, and one of Emma Curtis Hopkins' students was Ernest Holmes. And one of Emma Curtis Hopkins' students taught the Fillmores from Unity, and the Brooks sisters from Divine Science. So all of these different kind of New Thought teachings in the United States, if you look at them, they make their way back to Quimby. And there's another line that kind of comes down from Quimby through the Dressers, I believe it was, as the family. And William James, the father of American psychology, his parents were students of the Dressers. So James's outlook on life, if you read his work, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he breaks it down into two basic mindsets: the healthy-minded optimists, which was New Thought, and the sick-minded pessimists, which was everything else. But he gave a series of lectures in 1898 at Edinburgh. Edinburgh used to have, every year they'd have lectures on metaphysics. And James gave a series of lectures there. It's published in a book that's about 1,000 pages long called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Very fascinating reading, but I might be one of the only 3 people in the world who read it. I don't know. I mentioned to somebody one time I read it, and they said, well, you're either a preacher or a professor, because nobody in their right mind would read that book all the way through. But in that book, what James said was, nobody has ever studied religion as a scientist would study any other topic. I mean, you think about that. If you bring a scientist a flashlight battery and say, hey, look at this thing, I don't know how it works, but it's amazing. If I touch these wires to the ends, this light bulb lights, the scientist would sit down and say, well, let's think about that. Let's examine that. What do we know about electricity? What do we know about light bulbs? How can we do experiments? How can we test? Right? And what James was saying is, nobody ever looked across all of the different religions to see what common threads might be there, and to just examine them objectively without becoming entangled in them, without taking sides, without arguing. Well, yes, but this is what I believe, and this must be right. And I believe Ernest Holmes took up that mantle and said, yes, let's be free to discuss and explore topics that are concerned with religion. Religion being, I love this definition, your religion is your opinion of God. That's it. That's your opinion of God. Whatever your opinion of God is, that constitutes your religion. And Ernest Holmes said, let's look at all of the different opinions of God. And let's look at them as a scientist might look at them and say, well, what is common about them? And the first thing that's common about religion is they believe in some kind of creator, a God, as they call it. Now, the word God itself has different meanings to different people. Some people are put off by it. But nevertheless, they believe in a creative force in the universe, a conscious creative force in the universe. And if we took that If we just took that as a starting point, that's where he starts, and that's where we're going to pick up next week with the thing itself. What is this conscious, creative force in the universe? That's the thing itself. That's what we want to be curious about. That's what we want to explore. What is this thing? How does it work? What does it do? What is my relationship with it? If it can create consciously, through will, volition, can I create consciously through will and volition? And these, you can start to see then how this desire to know, this Gnosticism, this curiosity, this willingness to explore, this saying, you know, it's okay to ask these questions because these questions lead us into a deeper experience of the One. It's okay to ask. It's okay to think. We don't have to agree on everything. You know? We don't have to agree with everything in the textbook. But we do need to be thinking. We do need to be questioning. We do need to be curious. So that's kind of the setup. That's kind of the setup for how we approach this. We'll take the good wherever we find it. We'll leave the rest behind. We're willing to explore any and all ideas. Most importantly, what we are willing to do is to drop our own defensiveness. Right? So what I mean by that is that as human beings, we tend to think that because we believe it, it's right. And anyone who asks us why we believe it is a threat to us, a challenge to us. Just look at authority. Look at our politicians, for example. When somebody says, "Well, how do you know that? Is that true?" You know, well, I said so. You know, I'm in charge, and I said so. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. For level 1, it's good enough. For level 2, it's not good enough. You know, yeah, I heard you say it so, and I know that you probably might even believe it so, but that doesn't make it so. But we're not so much focused on out there as we are in here. How do I know what I know? Why do I believe what I believe? How did I come by these beliefs? Are there other beliefs that may be possible? Am I willing to put my beliefs out on the table where I can look at them and compare them to other beliefs? If my beliefs no longer serve me, am I willing to modify them? So it's in this spirit of a desire to know, in a curiosity, that we're going to pick up next week. If you have the textbook, Science of Mind textbook by Ernest Holmes, by all means read the first chapter of the introduction, the thing itself, and we will pick up next week with this. Basically, you know, what we are trying to do here is we are coming to know the divine in the only place that we can know it, which is within ourselves. This is where we know everything. You know, how do you know anything? Well, it happens somewhere in ourselves. Now here we would point to our head and say it's in my brain. In another culture, they would point to their stomach and they would say it's in here. It's in my consciousness. How do you know what you know? How do you know you are? How do you know I am? How do you know anything is real? Be willing to question to the void. Be willing to be curious. Be willing to explore. Set your intention to discover the presence and the activity of the divine within yourself and within all beings. And this will be a fantastic year of growth. And so it is.